Hello there. My name is Brett Levens. Welcome to my podcast. The little app here on my phone lets me know that today is 3,500 days sober. What? So just for perspective, like if there's 30 days in a month, I'm passed out drunk 30 days. Like to take a day or two off from being passed out, not just a couple beers, but passed out, was a feat for me. So to look at a number like 3,500 days, it's just crazy. And we're not just talking about 1 month, like I said 30 days. We're talking about years. And the progressive nature of the disease, like it got really bad as time went along. And I'd have these, it was just brutal and so confused and scared and felt so alone and unique and awful. And anyway, I escaped it, and I'm so grateful. I think society has made amazing strides in our perspective on addiction and recovery. I still think there's a long way to go. And so, I've just gotten more and more comfortable telling my story and, decided, I'm going to build a podcast. So I bring you my story. It's really all I have to offer is my story, and I bring you stories of people that I've met along the way that I think are useful and interesting. And so today I bring you Todd Edwards, my first sponsor. I got sober in Fort Collins, Colorado in 2013, and I was about 3 weeks sober when I met Todd, and so grateful. So we're gonna have a chat. And we're going to cover multiple topics. And if you dig the podcast, dig the recording, I'm racking up quite a few. You can go back and listen to some other ones. Feel free to share with others if you choose. The goal of this podcast is very simple: is to help people, help remove some shame and stigma, and that's what it's for. So anyway, here's Todd Edwards and I, and enjoy the chat. Well, it's awesome to see you. This is getting recorded. People don't know this that are listening in, but we can see each other, which is nice. And we used to, on a Sunday morning, this was a common day for us to go to our Sunday meeting there in Fort Collins, and then we would often go across the street and have breakfast, and then sometimes we'd walk a little ways and sit on a park bench. Do you remember all that?
I do indeed. Yeah. I do indeed. Yeah.
And of course, you're the guy that you have a lot of little clips of my story. Hopefully, they're all accurate. Your brain gets mushy over time, but my recollections of those early days, Todd, is, as you know, we've been clear on this, is just, it's tremendous that we met, and that you were willing to put up with me for a little bit as I clawed my way into some sort of human non-alcoholic guy. So yeah. I would like to say I remember very vividly the first time that we did basically the first step, which is kind of the most important step, sort of entering into sobriety. We weren't in person, and it was on the phone, and I was at a place that is very meaningful to me, which is this lake outside of Kansas City in Missouri. And I was on a walk, and one of us called the other. And I think I had spoken in a meeting about that lake and about my past. And I think what resonated with you was that I was describing all the different places that I had strategically placed alcohol so that I accidentally would never be without it. And that struck a chord. And then I think it was maybe a week later I was there, but obviously sober. And I think I was maybe 8 or 9 years sober, 7 or 8 years sober when you got into it. And so anyway, we just sort of spontaneously started talking and doing the work, and we've been friends and kind of co-conspirators since then. So that's a strong memory for me. Yeah. Well, let me tell you that my side of that one, because that's a strong memory for me too, because it was July 4th.
Yes.
So my story has some pretty distinct dates, right? Thanksgiving is my 6-month sobriety date, and July 4th is my step one. So I have that solid as a rock. And I'll tell you this, and I've told this to other people too, in Fort Collins, I didn't know shit about AA, but the first thing they have you do is they go around the horn there and they have you introduce yourself, and everybody's saying they're an alcoholic. Well, I wasn't at that point.
Right.
And it was hard. And I was going to, 2 meetings a day, and I just say it, but I felt gross saying it. And so for me, that was a relief, Todd, because that conversation that we had that day, where I basically said, "Yep, okay, guess I'm one of them." I was ready to use that language, and you were there for it. You're in a peaceful place and sharing. And then that day, I went into a meeting, and I didn't talk much. And that day, on a July 4th, I was in a meeting at the Happy Valley. Anyway,
Happy Destiny.
And my recollection is that I interrupted the meeting, but of course I didn't. I just shared like everybody else does. But in my mind, it was very dramatic, And I had a share where I said to everybody there in that room that I've said I'm an alcoholic many times when this little loop goes around. Today I mean it. And it was after you and I had that call, and I remember how I can remember it like it's yesterday. It was a big day for me too.
That's awesome. It makes me think of the most basic concept in recovery, which is that you can't do it by yourself, and you really need to have somebody, or in most cases more than one person that you're kind of doing it with. And that first kind of piece of admitting what's going on is so crucial, and so it takes the other person to kind of do it with you, for each of us to kind of share some of the craziness that we've been through. And that story that I told you about the lake, like, I basically had a 30 pack of utility beers in a cooler on the boat. That was like sort of the foundation, and then some what I would call tasty beers in the fridge, which are fine beers that are more expensive. And then I had wine, kind of sitting on the table in case somebody needed white or red. I had both available, and maybe even some champagne. And then, I had a bottle of pretty decent gin in the cupboard for gin and tonics, because at 4:00 that might be the right call. And then I actually had like a little plastic bottle of like a pint, actually a little bigger than a pint, of whiskey that I would keep in the wheel well where my jack was, just in case all of that other stuff, was not going to cut it, and I needed to get an emergency. And so, like, that's all it takes is explaining, like, hey, dude, I have been there. I know what it's like, and if you're anything close to this, then we're probably speaking the same language. And that's, so many people, that's that big hurdle, is like saying, okay, gosh, I think maybe I'm that. And doing it with another person and laughing about things makes it a whole lot more fun and easier. And then everything starts to get better, right?
Yeah. Well, and I want to drill into that one too, because these are great chapters of my story. I want to tell the other side of that one too. So, and you know this, but others don't. And someday I will tell the part of the story that you know well, which is where I thought I had figured out, everybody said, you got to get a sponsor, and I hear these words, you got to get a sponsor, got to get a home group. And I don't know what this means, whatever. But I made my first attempt at it. And as you know, this guy basically, at least the way I look at it, he didn't respond to me the way that felt welcoming. And so it broke me. And so I figured that I was just going to be, going to these meetings and not find a sponsor and, whatever, just keep going. In this giant room, a fairly big room, I sit next to you, luck of the draw. This is the one above the Rio where I used to drink margaritas. So this meeting that I met you in is above a Mexican restaurant in Fort Collins, and down below they had a limit of 2 because they knew they were hot, So anyway, I'm sitting there next to you, and they call on you. So of this room of probably 75 people, the moderator, the lead, calls on you, and you begin to tell a story about this boat. And when you talked about that, and you used the word, at least my recollection, Todd, is you used the word maintenance bottle. You talked about that plastic bottle that was hidden in the tire jack. And the wackiest thing in the world for me was I couldn't figure out how you'd read my mind. I thought I had invented the term maintenance bottle. Like, and I go back to my idea about the precious and the Gollum thing. And, Gandalf says, others have called it that, the precious. And you'd said the maintenance bottle. I'm like, what the hell? And you're sitting right next to me. You're the same name as my brother, Todd, who's one of my favorite drinking buddies in the past. And I chased you out of there. My recollection is I just like chased you out of there and like cornered you. Hey, man. How do you
Stole my term.
How do you remember that? Just out of curiosity, do you?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think if the thing is that alcoholics go to similar places, right? And so as you start to climb out, you begin to use more, whatever. Sometimes even when you're still in it, you call it that, but you don't necessarily admit it, to other people, or maybe there's a few people you admit it to, but ultimately only an alcoholic has a maintenance bottle, right? So they may not want to call it that, but then as we kind of start to look back and kind of see the craziness, then it kind of becomes funny, right? It's only funny when it stops. But, we can at least, even sometimes before we get sober, look at the craziness. Like, I'll tell you a story, which is I used to live in New Orleans, and, that's a town that's pretty darn convenient to be an alcoholic. And, I once admitted to a buddy of mine who came down there, down by the grocery store that I would go to, which was the Winn-Dixie. There were like 5 bars, and that was called the Riverbend of New Orleans. And so I admitted to my buddy, we were like on our way to one of the other bars. And I admitted to my buddy that this other bar was like my secret bar, where I would just go in if I was going to the grocery store and I needed a quick pop, either on the way in or on the way out, or both. And only an alcoholic understands that you do that because you don't want to go in there later that night with your girlfriend or your wife or other people and have the bartender be like, "Hey, Todd, it was great to see you 3 hours ago. Even better to see you back." Right. So anyway, so like the maintenance bottle, like, we do a lot of funny stuff. And so, I mean, the sad part of it is the lower it goes, the more those maintenance things become sort of essential to survival day to day. So, alcoholism is one day at a time, and sobriety is one day at a time. And these things that we're talking about are characteristics of true alcoholism. And again, it's talking one alcoholic to another that gets us to see that stuff. So,
yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah, I've my similar story is, when I think where my alcoholism really got going good was when I moved to Colorado, and the beer in the grocery stores was watered at that time. So you had to go to a liquor store to get beer. Now, I was already drinking crazy amounts, but when I really started buying those little airline bottles to start, and then pretty soon my life had to have liquor in it every day, right? And so we only had one car there in Fort Collins. You remember where I lived over there by the library? And like, they care, but I made it a habit of rotating my liquor stores, even if I had to walk or ride my bike great distances, because there were 3 of them right in there. There was one on the main street, there was one there by the grocery store, and then there was one kind of further out of town, just so that those people wouldn't clue in, this guy is coming in every day for a pint of Hornitos or Jameson. They're not that way. There, they think I've got my shit together.
You're normal,
right? And we laugh. And to your point a minute ago, we're laughing, right? We're both on screen laughing, and yet, and you said it a minute ago, when you're in it, it's not laughing. It's fucking tragic, and it is all consuming. And so when you find out that other people have done weird shit like this, and if you're into the AA thing, step 2 talks about the word insanity. Okay, who does that? People who have a little bit of trouble with this situation, and that's what was so encouraging for me, even all the way back to that time when you talked about the maintenance bottles. It was another shot straight into my gut that said, I'm not alone. I'm not unique. I'm not unusual. People all around me in this room and this guy sitting next to me can relate. And then over time, as you pointed out, 2 alcoholics together, the stories and the similarities just like are uncanny. And I'm grateful for that, right? That feeling like I'm not alone was key for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's good. I, at the risk of telling too many stories, that I did something similar, which is you kind of diversify your liquor stores to, and I guess, tell yourself a story that they don't think you're bad in somehow, in some way, right? And but I had this one liquor store that at towards the very end where I would go and get like a 24-ounce beer to kind of get the day started. And I was, by the last year, I kind of had shakes pretty much every day. And so I figured out that if I got exact change, I didn't have to hold my hand out there and have the guy see that I couldn't get change. And so, whatever, it was like $2.74, and I knew exactly what it was. And the one time that I made the mistake and was shaking there and the change fell all over the counter was the very last time that I didn't have exact change. Right. And so those are scary. Those are sad. But part of this thing too is being able to tell the truth and tell, like, hey, I don't ever want to go back there. So I'm not going to hold back pretending that it wasn't so bad. The more I tell the truth, the more likely I am to be in this thing for the long haul.
Yeah. Yeah. A topic that we sort of touched on, I don't think I'd hit the record button yet. I've approached some people who are what I would call more fundamentalist AA folks, and they're really uncomfortable with this getting out there and talking and naming names and everything else, right? And to that I say, I respect you and I'm all for it. But at least my story as it goes along, Todd, is I'm just getting more and more comfortable being a face of this thing, because there's a lot of really cool, good people that are walking around in recovery that and I'm not judging them to they need to come out or anything like that, but it's helpful, I think, for other people to see that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with that, and like you said, I respect, or I try really hard to respect everyone's different views, and we have to understand the environment, I think, in which AA in particular was started, right? Like that was in the 30s and 40s, and alcoholics were being institutionalized often for the rest of their sort of miserable lives, and saying that you were an alcoholic was basically a revolutionary act, right? And
Right.
so starting AA was revolutionary for this country, and starting recovery. Most of the other recovery groups are ultimately, in one way or another, connected to that founding of the 12-step program. So I believe that now we see it sort of kind of going almost the opposite, like overboard, where all you have to do is say I'm in recovery after you've done some heinous act, and like everybody, for celebrities at least, there'll be some forgiveness, and whatever, that's fine, that's everybody's path. But I do believe that the more comfortable some of us get in our own sobriety and recovery, and the more willing that we are to talk to anyone who asks us about it, the better off basically this component of our society that has this thing is, right? And there's another part of it, which is the educational benefit that goes to non-alcoholics, because it's so hard for people that we call them normies, right? Normal people. It's so hard for them to understand what is really happening. So to be totally willing to talk through it, I think is a gigantic benefit to those people. So I respect the anonymity concept, and particularly early in sobriety, where everyone is experiencing such a tremendous degree of fear, even if it's unrecognized. Like you got to get sober, then you got to do it for a while, then you can talk about what comes next. And so I'm very open, but I will admit that I've become more and more open the longer I've been sober.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Yep. I'm the same. And, it's funny. I remember those early trips across the street there where we go have breakfast, just to throw another story in the mix here. I remember sitting there with you and Lane, having breakfast, and we had our big books for people tuning in. They don't know what AA is. There's this blue book called the Big Book. It's the Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The restaurant across the street from this giant meeting is full of people who've spilled out across the street from an AA meeting and are now having breakfast. And there are big books sitting all over the tables. And I remember how uncomfortable I was that big book was sitting there on that table when the waitress came by.
Oh,
And that we were having that conversation. I kind of wanted everybody to kind of lower their inside. I wanted to control the situation. Everybody kind of lower their voices a little bit. So you take from there to where I am now and having conversations out in the open and sharing it with people and friends and family. I mean, everybody has their story and their journey and their, comfort. But like you, I feel a weird sense of obligation, right? In my own way. And, in AA, they talk about service. I think of it as a kind of service, and it's not to like proselytize and like soapbox, but for me, at least, it was small moments, straws in the camel's back over time, some bigger than others. But over time, those little seeds that planted that eventually got me to that place where I could want it for myself were critical. And maybe there's maybe a straw's getting dropped right now. Somebody listen to this, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with kind of the sense there. And your story about the big book and the restaurant makes me think about a time that I went out to dinner with my wife and another couple, kind of like 30 days into sobriety, very, very early. And I was, just like on pins and needles. And I was like coaching my wife on the way to the restaurant what the story was going to be. And the basic story was like not the truth. The story was going to be that I was like in training for something, right? Like, I'm, losing weight and getting in shape. And I'm just, not going to touch alcohol for 6 months or a year or something like that. And, we get to the restaurant and like, it doesn't even come up, and they didn't order drinks, but they didn't get anywhere close to saying, why aren't you drinking? Which is what I was just like prepared all day for this interrogation of why am I not drinking? And, so comfort grows over time. But the desire to deepen sobriety and be of service to others grows in your sobriety. And so I think that kind of being willing to help others, that includes not only people suffering, but also all the people around them, to help those people understand what it is and that it's not shameful. That it's, I'm left-handed, like there's 10% of the people in the country that are left-handed, give or take. Right. And it's been the same for 1,000 years. And like, I think from what I've read, there's something similar with alcoholics and like, it's sort of like, being diabetic or left-handed, like either you are or you aren't. Obviously it takes some work to get where we got. But at the end of the day, like accepting that that's just what you are, and helping other people understand that this is a condition that some people have and some people don't, I think is of tremendous value to society. And I guess one thing that you and I both, I know, implicitly agree on is it's also helpful to us, right? So that's part of this whole deal, is that it helps us stay sober. It helps us deepen our sobriety at the same time that we help other people.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. I'm glad you brought that in because it's so true. I remember early on people would say, well, the sponsor, it helps them as much as it helps you. And I was like, yeah, whatever. this poor Todd guy's got to sit across from me as I bellyache about all the whiners at AA. And you're just so kind and patient as we cruised along together through that period. But as I've gone into this, it does help me. All this shit. Like if nobody listens to this call right now that we're having, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's like me playing music in my office. Like I'm going to get a buzz off of that. I'm going to get a buzz off of this. And then it just so happens we're going to let people listen in that want to. But the truth is it helps me as well, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's change gears to one more topic. You're going to have you back. We're having a good conversation here, Todd. Are you retired now?
I am. I'm having a hard time with that word. But I guess it's acceptance in all aspects of life. I'm not done, but I don't know what my next gig is going to be. And I'm trying to just get comfortable with transition phases. Can I just tell? Well, so alcoholism has run in my family, and this is a period of time that my wife was quite worried about, that retirement, would be this, because I kind of did it one time before. I did a big transition without kind of a real job, so to speak, for 2 or 3 years. And that was a disaster. And every day became Saturday. And so, you could really, when you see the kind of thought I put into the planning around that boat, think about every day being, Saturday. But anyway, so, sobriety is essential to this phase of transition in my life. And I just shudder to think what would be happening if I was not sober, with this amount of free time, or time to just try to figure out how to fill, right? We are not good with kind of dead zones and indecision. And so I'm just super grateful to be in this state of mind and health as I try to figure out what's coming next for me.
That's lovely. Yeah. And that's there's stories in the big book about people who retire. So that's, and you're having an awareness, you're naming it, you're talking about it. Your wife is too. That's all, really healthy stuff. In my mind is, we've talked about this, Todd, not to have the secrets, right? Those little secrets that you keep to yourself, right? Those are dangerous for guys like us, particularly with booze and drugs. I would offer.
Yeah. Well, listen, when I was a younger man, this gets to the secrets and the precious and the weird things that go through our heads. I remember, my grandfather actually taught me to play golf when I was a kid. And as I got older and was a teenager, I always remember, like, kind of after playing golf and seeing the locker room, but, really the 19th hole was like this thing, like, wow, here's all these guys and they're all retired and they're all like having beers, and like, it seemed to me like, gosh, everything is perfect. Right. Like, and so I remember one of the weirdest thoughts that came into my mind, like right when I got sober, was like, oh man, I'm going to miss out on all that. Right. And everything else I can leave behind, but gosh, wouldn't it be great to have a giant frosty cold beer after playing golf when I'm retired? So anyway, so yeah, there's just, it's, our minds make lots of stories. Most of them aren't true. And, we have an obsession with alcohol. And so we build these fantasies in the future that revolve around alcohol. And so, that I was bummed out about that for 6 months. Like, oh, I don't get to have that. Like, everything else is fine. I can't have alcohol anymore, but shoot, wouldn't that have been nice? And those stories that you're talking about in the big book, those are the guys that kept that little fantasy and secret for their whole working lives, waiting for that day that they get their gold watch and their giant frosty beer, right? And then it's back to the races and they're dead or in some terrible situation shortly after that. So look, we have to be careful. It starts by being honest. It starts by, getting connected. We tell these stories, but we know what's possible if we don't stay doing this stuff.
Well, that might be the end of this. That was a really, really nice place to stop. But I do want to, like I said, I'd love to do this again, Todd. You and I have been talking for literally years now. 9 years, 6 months.
9 years, 6 months.
Who's counting? Actually, I didn't meet you until I was a couple weeks in. But so one of the things that I like to do with this podcast, because I've run into this enough, and something that, you were willing to work with me through was, the word I use is fundamentalist AA, because AA in my mind is like, I call it the Starbucks of recovery. There's one on every corner, every hour of the day. It is convenient as can be, and it's mostly consistent. And it's where the people who drink like I do hang out. However, for a lot of people, and including myself, there's some hangups that occur. And I want to, we could talk about anything, but the one I'm going to propose that we talk about for a second, that I'm going to tell you what I remember you saying to me about it. And that's the steps. So right now, somebody has made it this far in this podcast and they hear the word steps, they've just clenched up. How do I know? Because I did. And I guarantee I'm not alone. And so, and this isn't I'm not advocating for people to necessarily go to AA. I'm just going to suggest that what you said to me really resonated. And I'm going to tell you what it is, see if you remember. The steps to you, or the way I remember you talking to me about it are great conversation starters. You said that they weren't magic words. They were just simply a great way to start a conversation. And that has served me very well for people that are more skeptical and more uncomfortable with this whole, rigid, particularly where it reflects against like traditional Christianity with the God thing and all that. And I've been able to help some people, I think, right? It's a two-way street. They help me back. I help them, but it's to help them get over this idea that I'm different or that I don't fit here, which you did so beautifully for me, so beautifully. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic, and it even relates to the bigger question of the God thing and the fact that really all you have to do is sort of think about a higher power, and you don't have to know what it is or define it or have it be what anyone else's is, but it's just not you. Is there not something in this world that's slightly more powerful than you? And if you can agree that there is, then that's all you need to do to start. And similarly with the steps, I think we've talked about this, but I remember listening to this person talk about Buddhism and meditation, and this person is the first person I heard who said, like, if people are getting caught up in what your posture is and how you're sitting and how many breaths you take in versus let out and all this stuff, they're missing the point, right? As if not sitting, in misery is not going to give you enlightenment. I haven't heard a lot of people say it the way this person did, but it was all about like, there's costumes and then there's the reality of what you're doing. And similarly to the steps are not magical incantations that if we repeat them and do them exactly right, then we're going to be sober forever. But if we don't, then we're in deep, deep trouble. And so, yeah, so that's what I've always thought about those steps is it's like a conversation starter for a sponsor and a sponsee to do this work together. And we call it work, but if at the end of the day, if you're doing it right, it doesn't always feel like work. Sometimes it's pretty darn enjoyable, right? And so that's what those steps are, and that's what we did that first time we talked on the 4th of July. Is we just talked through the first step and are you or aren't you, right? And I'm going to tell you why I am, and if you have anything that's fairly similar, then let's talk about what you think and whether you think you are or not. And that's all it is. So yeah, so there's people that feel strongly that it has to be done exactly one way or another, and then there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily on that same program. We've talked about this kind of being a big tent program, and there's room for all of us, and what you need to do if you can when you start is just start gravitating towards the people that are speaking the things that make sense to you, right? And then try to do more of what they've done to advance in this program. Let me just, I guess, finish the comment by just saying there is no right way and wrong way. There's suggestions in terms of how to do this. There has to be a fundamental truth telling at the beginning to get to the admission part. But the rest of it's suggestions and it's conversation about our experiences in which we do this together. So you and I have always kind of, I think, been on the same wavelength. And so that's where it's important that we know there's other people like us that for one reason or another need to find people that are making sense to them. And so that's kind of our responsibility is to help those people because everybody's afraid when they come in. And so they're afraid of different things. Sometimes words are scary. The God word is very scary. The step word can, like you said, cause instant clenching up. And, it's so like, just know those people are out there and hopefully they find people like us.
Yeah. Yeah. And then those that need the story that I hear 100 times, I needed a really hard sponsor who da. Awesome. Great.
Right.
So rock and roll, man.
Right.
Ma'am.
Right.
Well, I'd love to finish this podcast with where we kind of started, I think, before I rolled tape here. It's a Sunday, right? It's, we don't talk all that often, but when we do, I feel like there's always a camaraderie that happens right away from the very beginning. And how amazing it is to have these conversations and laugh and all the other things and talk about the journey that we've been on and be sober on a Sunday, my man. Crazy.
At the risk of using the word miracle, for us, it is miraculous, right? So yeah, Sunday was, for me, usually Sunday was a day where I allowed myself to be hungover if I did for only a very short period of time.
Yes.
And then, you might as well medicate that as soon as you could. So Monday was usually much worse than Sunday. But so, yeah, to be clear-headed and feeling energetic and, be able to communicate clearly and with joy is an amazing thing. So yeah, I'm grateful. And I think what you're doing here with this podcast is awesome. And like you said, like if nobody listens to it, I've still had a blast. But if one person gets something from it, then that's fantastic.
Yeah, man. Right on. Thank you, Todd. Thanks for another great conversation and a long line of conversations. We've known each other a good while now, and you were just a super important character in my story. Those first 6 months, those meetings after the meetings, and the weekends at the coffee shop, and hanging out above Horseshoe Reservoir there. Yeah, man. Lucked out when I met you. So thanks for being willing to do this recording and share some of our history and some of our story together and some of our perspectives. Folks, at the end of the day, I'm a recovery advocate. I think that's kind of what I've boiled it down to. However that works for you, great. But first things first is you got to be able to talk about it. And you got to be able to share honesty and truth and remove shame and stigma. And hopefully this podcast is a vehicle, another one in the chatter of the world that is doing that. And ideally, it's helping a couple people. So if this helped you in some way, educated you a bit, or gave you a new perspective, or perhaps made you consider your New Year's resolution and you maybe want to back off the booze for the month of January or something like that, whatever, man. That's what this is about. So I'm grateful you listened, and we'll see you at the next one.